Welcome to Quitting Made Real by Nicorette, the podcast bringing you real stories about breaking the smoking addiction. My name is Cynthia Loist, and quitting smoking is one of the single best things I ever did for myself. We have a remarkable lineup of guests, and they're sharing their unique stories of how everyone affected by nicotine addiction can help make quitting real. Tegan Quin is one half of the acclaimed indie pop duo Tegan and Sara. She's joining us today to share what led her to quit smoking before the age of 30. Thanks for joining us, Tegan. Tegan, I feel like a lot of people might be surprised to learn that you were once a smoker. I was certainly surprised. I'm always curious, what was it that actually led you to start smoking to start with?
So I had my first cigarette in 7th grade.
Seventh grade is when you started. That's almost my son's age. So you're giving me heart palpitations. Carry on.
When I see like 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds now, and I think about the fact that I had my first cigarette at that age, it blows my mind. I think things have changed a lot. Obviously, smoking was more prevalent then. I mean, you could still smoke on airplanes, you could smoke at the mall. I had plenty of friends whose parents smoked. I Yeah, so like it doesn't feel crazy when I put it in that context, but I still was so young. But I remember a friend of mine stole a cigarette from an older sibling and a bunch of us went outside, her house and went behind the back gate, and we all took a drag off of it, and I remember thinking it was disgusting, and I had a few, I'd say a handful of experiences like that in middle school and junior high, you know, um, it's such an interesting time because it's like when you start to take risks and you start to misbehave a little bit, and, I dated, a guy all through high school who smoked, and so I can remember, like, going to Denny's with him, and it started out as like, "Oh, I just want a drag of your cigarette," and then it was like, now we're sharing a cigarette, and then it was like, "I just want a cigarette." Um so, it was an evolution.
Yeah, it is an evolution for sure. Like, was there a point in time where you were like, okay, I thought I could take it or leave it, but I have a suspicion now that I'm actually hooked?
So I, like, considered myself a social smoker, which is a game. Clearly, we all play with our addictions, but I had sort of, marked myself as a social smoker for 10 years. So from the time I was 15 till I was 25, I rarely bought packs of cigarettes. If I did, it was like, at the bar. And, I'd come home, put it in a Ziploc bag and throw it in my freezer and not smoke again until I went out to the bar. I had a lot of rules around smoking, like no smoking alone, no smoking in the daytime. I was always very clear that smoking was bad and I was always trying to keep it under control. And I think for myself, calling myself a social smoker and having all those rules was my way of being like, I am in charge. I'm in charge of tobacco. And I think it was probably when I was 25 or 26 that I went through a really bad breakup and I moved into a place on my own and I was really like what I would call unsupervised for the first time. Like I didn't have anyone to justify it to. I could go buy cigarettes and I could change the rules. And I think it was around then that I started to be like, "Oh, like, I'm a smoker." I still didn't wake up and have cigarettes. I still didn't, I wasn't a, like, have 3 cigarettes with coffee in the morning kind of person. It was always sort of something I did later in the day, a nighttime, a reward for after a show, a reward, for after a long day or socially at the bar. But, yeah, the rules started to change, and I started to be like, "Oh, like, I'm not in charge." And, it was that negotiation that was happening on the inside of, like, well, tonight I'm not going anywhere and I'm not doing anything. I'm just at home watching TV, so I'm not going outside to smoke. There's no smoking tonight. And then it would be like, oh, I'm having a really interesting text conversation with this girl. That counts as social. I'm gonna go outside and have a cigarette. And it was just like, I would just this, like exhausting negotiation over how much and when that I realized like, oh, I'm like at war with myself, or not with myself. I'm at war with nicotine.
Yes. Well, it's almost like you're bargaining with the devil, right? You're just trying to like, well, maybe this works, and maybe if I do this, it's okay. And meanwhile, like there's a little voice that's probably behind that, knowing that like, ha, we got you. But there is this kind of idea around music and like the rock world, that you think about musicians in bars during a particular time. Um, that the cigarettes were often, like, just go hand in hand with that. So was that part of the mystique that you feel like drew you in as well?
I think I was always really sensitive. Like I didn't want our fans to know I smoked. I didn't want to like, I never smoked on stage, for example. I would actively go out of my way to keep, me smoking a secret, not because I was ashamed of it, but because we had a lot of young people in our audience, so I certainly didn't wanna be the person that's, like, out in front of the club smoking. And we were so young when we started touring. I was 18 when I started to tour, and so, yeah, venues still had smoking. Like, most of the clubs we played the first 5, 6 years, the whole club was a smoking section, and so I didn't necessarily feel like a stigma or embarrassment about smoking, but I understood that it was not a good thing. I understood it was bad for me, and I certainly didn't want to make it seem like I thought it was cool. Like, I would have never gone outside of venue and bummed a cigarette off of a fan, Like, um yeah, but it was a reward. It was a reward at the end of a show. I wasn't a big drinker, and I think cigarettes just became this reward for me, like, oh, well, when it's all done and the crew has packed up the trailer, everybody goes and stands out by the bus and has, like, a beer and a cigarette, and I really looked forward to that, and so that was more of my relationship to smoking when we were on the road, was it was just, like, this thing I could look forward to at the end of the day because there really wasn't that much to look forward to.
I totally relate to that. Like, when I started out working in television, I was a producer and I was going around, you travel around, you interview interesting people, and then it became this kind of punctuation, a reward, a moment to myself, which makes it extra hard to kind of like get rid of at some point when you decide it's no longer your, friend or your like, your moment to yourself in a good way. So did you find that challenging?
So I feel like I'm really lucky because I was not a get up in the morning and have a cigarette person. I wasn't a if I'm having a coffee, I must have a cigarette person. So some of the associations that a lot of people have with smoking, I didn't have. My current partner, we've been together 10 years and she quit a few months after we started dating. And she had a 3-hour commute to work when we were living in LA, like an hour and a half on either side of this 8-hour workday. And she smoked on her commute. So when she quit, I mean, she was just like, "What am I going to do during that 3 hours?" I mean, she had a severe depression. It was truly like she'd lost her best friend. She stopped drinking coffee, she stopped drinking alcohol, like, she just was like, "What's the point?" It was like, at times, I felt very dramatic, but the longer I, like, was a part of watching her go through that, it was my first time watching someone intimately go through that experience. I will say that I learned that my experience was not the same. I was tortured and negotiating with myself all the time, but I didn't have the same kind of relationship to smoking that, say, someone like she did. But I had the kind of relationship with smoking where it was really reward based and it was really social, like it was really tied in with my social behavior. I think that I understood that part of my process of quitting was going to be rewiring those interactions and rewiring those parts of myself, and to understand that while smoking hadn't been a part of my full identity, it was a part of a very specific, you know, um, part of myself. And to not have that cigarette, it definitely took some getting used to. It was like really awkward to be standing with the smokers and not smoking, or going to the party and not having to do anything with my hands, like not have anywhere to go. And like, um, I felt very exposed getting rid of smoking.
Yeah, I can relate to that. So you're talking about rewiring. So what did some of that rewiring look like, especially while you were juggling touring or writing or hanging around with people who were smoking?
I mean, the first big step I think I took was even just using language like, "I'm going to quit smoking." I remember the first time I was like, "I'm going to stop," and that was in 2007. I was, uh, at the beginning of the year, Sarah and I had, booked a house in Portland, and we were going down to make an album called The Con, and we were gonna be there for 3 months, and nobody in the house smoked, and nobody who we were making the record with smoked, and so I was like, "This is the perfect time." Like, I was like, "I'm not gonna drink, I'm not gonna smoke, I'm gonna go there, I'm gonna make the album and just break this sort of weird habit." Still, like, just like, "It's a habit, it's a social thing," but I knew better. Ended up quitting for 8 months, and I didn't find it hard, honestly, at first, it really wasn't hard. It became part of my identity that I didn't drink and smoke. I mean, these days, we have so much language around, abstinence and addiction and health, and I know so many people that are sober, but no one I knew was like that. So it was like it became my identity. I started hanging out with a lot of straight edge people, and I was like, I do not smoke. I do not drink. First, it was really easy, but then the second we put the album out and we got back out on tour, of course, you know, a couple weeks on tour, everybody going outside to have drinks and smoking. It's like it was so easy to get back into it. Now, I definitely had as many rules, if not more, than I'd had before. So again, it didn't turn into a thing where I was smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. I think I at most I was ever only smoking 5 cigarettes a day, but it didn't matter because it just took so much time. Like I was just always thinking about when and how and with who and how many and um so that feeling came back right away. I was also very lucky because right around that same time I started dating someone who smoked, and I'd also never dated a full-on, like, get up and chain smoke in the morning kind of smoker, and I did find that helpful because I was like, "I don't wanna do that." Like, I don't wanna be controlled by my cigarettes, like, when she couldn't get cigarettes, she was very hard to be around, and I remember thinking, "The goalposts are here, like, for a reason." Like, I am, controlling this because, like, I don't wanna be that. So I think even though it took another couple years for me to fully quit, I never came back from that first quitting with the same, like, carefree, "I'm a young person and I just go out and have cigarettes." I was like, in the back of my mind, I was like, "This is bad. I have to stop doing this. This only gets worse."
I mean, that's great, but it must have been hard to be in a partnership with somebody who you're kinda like, "Huh, I don't wanna go there." Was that a thing in your relationship at all? Was that tricky?
That's probably another podcast.
Okay, alright,
There's,
fair.
like, probably lots at play there, but I will I'll say that, like, my current partner, who I've been with for 10 years and is a wonderful human being, when she and I started dating, she smoked and she was like, "Oh, I'll just quit. I would never like, why would I put you through that? Like, you're an ex-smoker and it's so disgusting. Like, I don't wanna be your disgusting new girlfriend that smokes." And I was like, "Damn." But, internally, yeah, like, I remember one time her being like, "Come with me outside for a cigarette," and it was, like, midnight, and I was just like, "Yeah, I don't want this, like, not for me," you know? So, the position I found myself in was very helpful, and I also think that, I've had the fortune of, knowing people who smoke their whole lives, and it's not great. It's not great what happens to you, it's not great what happens to your lungs, like, I've seen the effects of that, and I don't think fear and shame are helpful tools for quitting anything. I think addiction yeah, your body can override that. Like, when people would say to me, "You need to stop smoking, it's so bad for you, you're gonna get cancer and die." All I wanted to do was smoke. That just if you don't understand how addiction works and you don't understand how nicotine, like, leaves your body and your system and all you care about is nicotine, like, that is the most awful strategy to get someone to quit. And so I think it was a combination of many things that led me to a place where I started to look into the near future and say, "What's my strategy? Like, how do I get out of this?"
Well, let's talk about that because okay, so Nicorette's 30-day no smoke November, it actually challenges people to set a timeline. And you mentioned that one of your timelines was really wanting to quit before you turned 30. Why was that?
Yeah. Somewhere along the way, like in my late 20s, I read somewhere that, if you quit smoking by the time you were 30, that your whole body just magically repairs. Like your lungs will go back to like, I just like some weird article like that crossed my path and it just became this marker in my brain, like be done by the time you're 30. I just think that, yeah, there was a trend towards quitting. And I think nowadays, obviously we have these you know, people not drinking, for a month and, doing these challenges, but like that was so not something that anyone was doing when I was in my 20s. And so I didn't necessarily say, "Oh, I'm going to take a break or I'm going to do this or that." But I just started to look toward the future and say, "Don't you don't want to be doing this when you're in your
Yeah.
30s." And so I kind of think I just held on to that article as a marker, as something to like, as a goal. I didn't increase my smoking. I didn't decrease my smoking. I just was like, this is something that has an end. I could be a non smoker. I didn't have to be an ex smoker. I didn't have to be a quitter. I could be a non smoker. And it felt very active. That felt like a choice. And that's where I held on to that, where I was like, I'm going to not be a smoker anymore. I'm going to not smoke, and I'm not going to smoke by the time I'm 30. So it just became this language, and I talked about it with everybody, and I talked about it all the time. And like I said, I didn't increase it, I didn't decrease it. Initially, I just was like, this is when I'm stopping, and it's going to be a choice, and I'm in charge, and I'm in control of it. And I know that is not how it works, but that's how I thought
But I like that.
identity
I
sex.
like that a lot because it's like you came up with an identity that you wanted to be, and you were going to step into that. I also like this idea of timelines to say like, okay, by the time I'm 30, I'm going to be quitting. Anytime you sort of decide like, okay, on a timeline, I'm going to give myself until a certain age, certain day. It helps anchor, I think, that decision in something. I definitely know for me, it was a lot of like experimentation. I also utilized the patch. I utilized gum. I'm so grateful to have had those kinds of crutches for my quitting smoking journey. What would be your advice for young artists who are starting out and like you, they can't imagine what it would be like when they're 30, 40, 50? What advice would you give to them?
My advice to all people is just like we're living in a really complicated world, and social media, exaggerates some of the worst qualities in people, and it makes us contrast and compare all the time, and like ultimately all you can do is really like sit with yourself about what you're looking for and what you want and what you need. And for me, I knew I was in trouble with smoking because I was negotiating with myself all the time, and I became fatigued. I became exhausted. And I think my advice would be, if you are doing that about anything, your weight, your body, your mental health, alcohol, drugs, smoking, a relationship, if you are constantly in a cyclical conversation with yourself and you are exhausted by that, that is the first step of like being like, okay, I have a problem, or I need to fix this thing, or I need to stop doing this thing, and I need to reach out to somebody and get resources and get help. Knowing when to say that to people around you, to yourself, like that's key. So just when that negotiating starts, that's the flag. There's so many good reasons to not do it, but it's like also okay to just accept that sometimes we are not perfect. I'm not embarrassed to say it took years for me to figure out my plan to evacuate that plane. And when I did, I really haven't looked back. It's been a really easy 16 years almost now, 15 years of not smoking. Like I don't miss it.
So I'm curious, why was it important for you to be a part of this podcast and share your quitting journey?
A lot of our work with the Tegan and Sarah Foundation, where we raise funds for LGBTQ organizations, so much of the sentiment of these amazing grassroots community-driven organizations is saying we are normal, we are human, we need each other, community is important. We just need to provide these basic necessities for each other. It's like they've been healing me. Like for 10 years, I've been like, right, I don't have to be an icon. I don't have to be a spokesperson. I don't have to be the lucky one who made it. I can just be me. And me is flawed and complicated, and I can just be honest about that. And I think that's why I said yes to doing this was when my manager emailed me about it, I had no info. It just was like, "Hey, there's gonna be this. Would you be open for a conversation about quitting smoking?" And I like, before I knew anything, I was like, "Yeah, I think I would." I've never talked about it, so I feel like it would be really cool to talk about it. I've never talked about smoking, so let's talk about it.
Well, we're so glad you did, and you are iconic. So you can hold space for all of that. Thank you, Tegan, so much for being here. This has been the Quitting Made Real podcast by Nicorette. Thank you so much for listening. And if you're thinking about quitting, remember it is never too late to make quitting real.
Only to be used by adults who are trying to quit smoking. Warning: this product contains nicotine. Nicotine is highly addictive